So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Murder Most Foul. My guest today is Robert Hilland, who is with a co-author, we'll talk about that in a moment, wrote in a fantastic book called Chasing Evil. And it has to do with a cooperation of an FBI agent, Bob, and another person, and he's going to tell me about that other person. We'll keep you in the dark for a few moments. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Excited to talk to you and your audience.
So, as I tell my audience, write several times, and I'll tell it before the end. We'll get websites if they're out there so people can contact you. But the book, as I said, is called Chasing Evil. Now, I sometimes get my books, this one I bought, Barnes & Noble. It's out there. They got a special table for it, my area. And, or you can get it at Amazon. You can get it a small bookstore. It's always good. But my wife is telling me I got to cut down on the books. So I do a lot of my books to the library. Now I have to point out to you, Bob, that your book is in Rhode Island libraries. They have 18 copies throughout the library system, 25 on holds.
Wow. That's exciting to hear.
I couldn't get it if I wanted it. I'd be waiting forever for it. So you're getting a couple of bucks. The library, maybe they get less because I get a break, but you're going to get $1.50 or something from my purchase.
Well, I hope everybody likes it.
So that's the book. Now, and you got to get the book, and I'll say this for a reason. As we go through, you'll figure this out, that it is such an intense story, and we can't cover it in the time that Bob and I have together. And I wouldn't want to, because the reading of this is not just the story, but the reading is you feel like you're in the middle of a, NCIS episode or Law and Order, but it's real. And it's your life, Bob, and it's with this other wonderful person. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the story, 99% is you, your work. It's how you grabbed a hold of things like a dog and wouldn't let them go and helped closure for a lot of people. So we will be discussing that in a moment. So before we get started, tell us who's this co-author on this book with you?
Yeah, so my co-author is a guy who I now refer to as my brother. His name is John Edward. I met him in 1998. He is a well-known medium. He's a psychic, and I am not one to believe in psychics, and I certainly didn't believe anything he had to say the first day I heard him on the radio. But I think because of my high skepticism and my frustration hearing him on the radio, that's what kind of drove me to actually see him, to kind of prove to myself that he was a fraud, or if he wasn't, maybe he was going to help me on a case.
Now, also, you point out in the book that, again, not going into your personal things, but your father was a big skeptic, and you were afraid to tell him that you were doing this. And
my dad he was a real life Archie Bunker. My dad was. Yeah.
And also John's father. Yes. So upset with what he was doing in life that he had to change his name. In other words, he used his middle name rather than his surname to sort of, shield whoever, keep things copacetic with his father. And I'll say up front to my audience, I entered this and I've done a couple things that had some paranormal, not psychic, but paranormal on the side. I've done Lizzie Borden and stuff like that. But, I can do the whole thing. Something, but as you go through the book, there are I put it into two categories of things that are going in, and John, I think, calls them his spirit guides. That the things that, and we'll get to some of those, that's the specificity of the things that tips he gave you, or the name is this, or the whatever is that. And it's not the stuff from a carnival. It's real stuff that gets proved later, and he would have no way of knowing anything about the case. And he would just talk to you, and it had nothing to do. You didn't prompt him. He wouldn't look it up on Google to find out anything about this case. That I'm convinced. I'm hooked. The only thing that's not provable is when he is speaking of spirits from the other world contacting, especially deceased members of family saying, Dad's looking at you or Grandma's looking at you. That's a wonderful thing, and maybe it's real. But then that has to do with the afterlife, and you have to, have your own feelings about that as a person. I do. But the other stuff that's 99% of the story is how he helped you with tips. Look over, and he would say one time, I guess he must have been on a cell phone. No, look over. No, she's in front of you. No, walk over there. No, the body is here or the person is here. Look out, watch out. He did, and we'll get to that. He warned you of things when he had bad. He'd call you up. Like you said, he was your brother. Over time, he would just call you out of the blue. You weren't even contacting him. He would say, I'm worried about this. Be careful of this person, whatever. So that is a feeling. And you say people have feelings, but they turned out to be important. So I don't want to take the win up, but this is of the things about, that's why I give if your audience out there, my friends, if you are skeptic, pick up the book for two reasons. I believe you will no longer be a skeptic, but that's not even important because you don't even have to believe to find this amazing story. And we're going to tell a little bit about it now. We can't cover all of it. You've covered several cases that you did with him. And then again, tell me, this is like over 20 years or so?
Well, I've known this since 1998 till present. So that's nearly 30 years now. Almost.
There you go. Now it's nearly 30. And as I say, there are several cases. One of it that we are going to delve into a little bit, the twists and turns of it, and just the facts, ma'am, because it is so in the book. It's a big portion, I'd say. I don't know, about a third or a half. And it comes back later because it is over a period of time, and it's the John Smith case. So before we even get into involving, the help that John gave you, why don't you give my audience, a thumbnail of John Smith, how you first met him. It had nothing to do with the case you then decided to follow for a long time, got stuck in your craw. It happens, and you tried to solve.
Yeah. So I started my career a long time ago in the early 90s as a police officer in New Jersey, in a small department called West Windsor, New Jersey. October 4th of 1991, this man by the name of John Smith, that you referred to, came into the department about 10 o'clock at night, and he filed the missing persons report. He claims his wife by the name of Fran was missing. He came to the police lobby. Another uniformed officer was taking his report. And I was inside, like the dispatch area, looking through the bulletproof glass, and I just vividly remember that moment when I saw him. And your viewers can go online and look up this case and see his cold eyes. It's in the book. But in that initial report, he didn't really provide a lot of information of concern. He just said, we've been married for about a year. She was very homesick. And he basically said that he thought she had gone home to visit family either in Florida or Texas or Indiana, and he wasn't particularly concerned, but her family was kind of pressuring him to file this missing persons report. So there wasn't a great alarm. And just for the record, I had nothing to do with the initial investigation. But as that investigation unfolded, that something nefarious had happened to Fran. It would take me quite a long time to give you all the details, but just suffice to say the totality of the circumstances strongly suggested that he had done something to her. Moreover, as they started looking in this case, they found out this same man, John Smith, had been married to another woman in Ohio many years earlier in 1974 who vanished under virtually identical circumstances. So, and to add to it, when Fran disappeared, he had another common law wife living in Connecticut at the time. So obviously great cause for concern. The challenge to all of these cases was in neither disappearance was a body ever located. So despite the best efforts of all, the investigators were very competent. They couldn't find the body. The circumstantial case was very significant, but the prosecutors were not inclined to move forward on the case without the body. It went cold. I left my department in 1997 and I joined the FBI. My first assignment in the FBI, I was assigned to the New York field office, and more specifically to a cold case homicide squad. We investigate unsolved murders that typically pertain to mob cases, organized crime cases, gang cases, that kind of thing. I had a full plate, a full caseload, probably 20 different cases I'm working at a time. And one day I happened to be called back to my old department to testify on some old cases, and I bump into the lead detective who had the original case of John Smith. And having coffee with him, I looked behind him, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 binders, and it had the name of the victim, Betty Fran Smith. I asked, his name was Mike. I said, Mike, whatever happened to that case? And his exact words were, it's dead in the water. This guy killed at least 2 women that we know of, but it's dead. So me being young and enthusiastic and full of energy, I said, well, listen, I have access to a lot of experienced FBI agents, NYPD guys, a lot of resources. Maybe we could take a look at it. So that's how I started getting involved in the case. So the first step in any cold case, as you probably well know, is to educate yourself as to all the circumstances and facts of the disappearance, as well as all the investigative efforts throughout the years. You're looking for missed opportunities, witnesses, leads, or suspects. Is there physical evidence that can be processed? You're looking for new opportunities, not to Monday morning quarterback a case, but just look for new ways to shake this thing up. So in that moment, you have to understand, I'm looking at case files from 1974 till 1998, and multiple agencies from state police, local police in New Jersey, and Connecticut, and Ohio, and Florida. I had probably a half dozen bankers' boxes full of police files, so quite a lot to learn. It was at this time, Jim, that I'm commuting to Manhattan, and I was listening on the radio, a very, very popular radio station. I heard this man by the name of John Edward, who claimed to be psychic, and I am not one to believe in paranormal. I don't believe in any of this nonsense. I'm a very conservative guy, raised in a church. So he would come on the radio and profess that he had the ability to take calls from callers, and he could connect to your past loved ones. So you would hear this nonsense, and I would think this was complete silliness, and I would shut the radio off. And then a week or 2 later, I'd hear him again, and it truly irritated. It felt like fingernails on a chalkboard kind of thing. And I remember thinking, how stupid can people be? And after hearing this about 3 or 4 times, Jim, one day I kind of had enough of it. And I vividly remember the day. It was a rainy day. I was running late. I was in the Jersey side of the Holland Tunnel. I heard him do his thing, and I said, all right, I'm going to fix this. So I called his office, spoke to his assistant, and the only information I said was my name was Bob Hilland from the FBI New York field office, and I worked on a cold case homicide squad. I had heard this guy, John Edward, on the radio, and who claimed he could connect to people on the other side through their loved ones. And by my calculations, I was going to put him on the phone with a family member, this person I was looking for. He was going to do his thing, and I was going to solve this case. And I could tell his assistant was very leery. She first didn't know if I was really in the FBI. I helped her understand that I was. But ultimately, she took my information. She told me he, meaning John, does not usually get involved in these kinds of cases or this kind of work, but she would talk to him. So I kind of dismissed it. In my mind, I kind of thought her lack of reaction confirmed for me that this was all a con. Well, the following week or so, I get a call unexpectedly from his assistant, and she said, hey, John is wanting to meet with you. Could you come in tomorrow afternoon? And I was asked to bring with me, she called them items or artifacts that belonged to whoever the person I was looking for. In this case, of course, it's Fran. And she explained he needed these objects to help connect, whatever that meant. So I'm playing along. I said, sure. So I contacted the detective in Jersey. His name is Mike. I said, Mike, go into evidence, get some of Fran's belongings. And he was over the moon excited about this. I certainly was not. And Jim, the day that we went to see him, I walked around my office to 4 different women. And I would ask them, hey, Susie, can I borrow your necklace? Hey, Jane, can I borrow your watch? And I grabbed 4 belongings from 4 agents that I worked with, females, and I put them in the bag with these other 5 items that belonged to our victim. We get out to his office. It reminded me of a doctor's office, and there was a waiting room, and his assistant said he was finishing up with some clients in the back. Short time thereafter, he appears, escorts us to the back, and he very specific in his instructions. He said, listen, he asked if either of us had ever worked with a psychic. Of course, I said no. He said, in a minute when we get started here, I'm going to start getting information. A lot of the things I say are going to resonate with you, going to make sense. I don't want you to say anything. I don't want you to acknowledge it. I just want you to remain silent. Don't interrupt me. Don't say that's right. Just don't comment. He says, however, I probably am also going to say things that are unfamiliar to you. I may say names, places, that kind of thing. If this happens, please make note of it. Write it down because it's happening for reasons. Okay. So I put these 9 objects in front of him. The detective seated to my left. And if I put them before you now, Jim, you would not be able to distinguish any from the other. Now, what I remember vividly was it wasn't anything magical. I just remember him taking maybe a breath or two and calming down. I saw his eyes going back and forth across these items, and then he kind of pulled some items together and he held his hands over them. And he said, I don't know what these things are. And he pushed them aside. He said, but they have nothing to do with the real reason you're here. And those were the 4 objects that belonged to the women from my office. He then proceeded to pick up a pair of eyeglasses that belonged to our victim. And Jim, the things he said were utterly impossible for him to have known. Remember, the only thing they knew was my name was Bob from the FBI New York office. They knew nothing. He described the victim, called her by her name, explained she had 2 names. He said it's like Mary Jane and Betty Fran, but she goes by the middle name Fran. He described her physically, said things such as, hey, she has metal in her hip like pins. She's missing a toe. She has breast implants. Says the person she's crossed over, the person responsible is either a boyfriend or husband. It's a J name. I'm pretty sure it's John, and I think it's a husband. And he starts spitting out things that are very specific and singular in nature. At some point, Jim, he asks, who's Michael? Well, it turns out that Michael was the younger brother of John Smith. And John Edward that day says, Michael is the key to this investigation. Michael knows everything. You need to get to Michael. And then just to fast forward the story, he's just suffice to say, he's giving us a lot of information. At one point, I remember he had us draw a map, and it was crazy. But at some point, his whole affect and demeanor changed. And he said, wait a minute. He said, why are you really here? And he pointed at me. And in my mind, I'm thinking he's picking up on the fact that I didn't believe he was legitimate. He said, you already have this victim you're looking for. He says, I see the line of police cars on the side of a road. I see there's a ravine, there's a box, and he's describing this victim dismembered in great detail. And at this point, I have no idea what he's talking about, nor does this detective. Well, he's describing this scene, and all of a sudden, you saw like a light bulb come on. He said, oh, wait a minute. This man that you're looking at, he's killed other women. The police have recovered one of his victims. You just haven't made the connection yet. And the last part of that day, Jim, I had put him on the phone with Fran's daughter. And in the course of that conversation, I was hoping he was going to connect to Fran for more information. But just by circumstance, he wound up connecting with me and connecting with my family and revealing to me things about my family, some of which I knew, and also revealed to me some things that I didn't know, some family secrets. So that day for me, when I left, I use the analogy, it felt like somebody took a snow globe and shook it up, and that's what it felt like to me. And I had to go back and marinate on it and reflect, is there any way I could have inadvertently tipped him off or fed him? And each time the answer was no. So with that information, I started putting, and we didn't know what John Smith was at that point. He had vanished in 1996, I believe it was, last time he was seen. He said he's on the West Coast, like California. End of the story, all of these things he told us that day proved to be true. Michael had the key. Michael came forward. Michael provided the information. His first wife, Janice, was a scene he saw on the side of the road. All those pieces of information that he provided us proved to be true. And that one case, just by circumstance, led to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. That's how I met John Edward.
And as you sort of point out, there are throughout the story of Smith, there are the 2 wives, both are dead, both are gone, and you're trying to find both of them, the bodies, and also obviously pin the crime on who did it. Fran was the first one you started with, and then you went looking for Janice was first, or was Fran first?
Well, Janice was his first wife that he killed first. That was in Ohio in 1974. Fran was murdered September 20th in 1991. So when I was conducting the investigation, I was looking for both of them, right? So it wasn't like I prioritized one over the other. I was conducting a logical investigation, trying to find either or both of them. So I had to figure out a way to get Michael to come forward. And what was interesting when John Edward named Michael was, when you read a police report, there's the things you read, but then there's things that maybe are not in the report that you only get from speaking to the investigators. So I had the luxury of talking to some of those men and women, and a couple of them would make offhand comments to me saying, we always had this feeling about Michael, that maybe Michael knew something, but they couldn't articulate. They just said it was a feeling we had. So on May 5th of 1999, I created a scenario. I had, through a lot of effort, found John Smith, and that in and of itself was quite an undertaking. There's only a few 100,000 men in America named John Smith. And this was before the day of technology we have today. Today we can find them very quickly. Back in the day, it was a much different ballgame. But by the time we find him, he unfortunately is married yet again. He's relocated to California, reestablished his life again. And now we have a sense of urgency that is this new wife in danger as well. So the game plan was early one morning on May 5th of 1999, as John Smith went to work at about 6:30 in the morning or so, I intercepted him as he unlocked the front gate to his business. And I took him to a local hotel room with another agent, and the room was wired. And next door we had two profilers from Quantico. And the moment I started that interrogation, what I had previously done is I had identified everybody in John Smith's life over these 3 decades that potentially could hold a piece of the information. And on that day, as soon as I had Smith in that hotel room, simultaneously throughout the United States, FBI agents and detectives grabbed everybody in his life and interviewed him the same day, same time, all over the country, and then fed their interview results to the profilers who fed it to me. So I spent from about 7 a.m. till 3:30 in the afternoon interrogating Smith. There was a particular point where he started breaking, but then gathered himself. And ultimately, he faked a heart attack to get out of that. That's how he got out of the interrogation. He faked a heart attack, which was nonsense. But the following week, Michael comes forward. And Michael's story is simply that in 1974, when John's first wife, Janice, disappeared, it was around Thanksgiving. And the family always celebrated Thanksgiving at the grandparents' house, grandma, grandpa's house, and turkeys being cooked. And remember, the family ran a small. This town is like Mayberry. Remember Andy Griffith's show? This was like Mayberry. So imagine this old rural kind of like farm-looking house, and next door is a separate small garage, 2-bay garage with a gas station in front of it. Well, it was closed for Thanksgiving. It was the holiday. Well, at some point, Michael's watching a football game, and he goes outside, and he sees the bay doors to the garage are open, like the business is open, which confused him. And he walked in, and he saw his brother John building a box out of plywood. The timing of this was a few days earlier, a week earlier. John had reported his first wife, Janice, as missing to the local sheriff's office out there in Wayne County. So Michael walks in and says, "What are you doing?" John says, "Well, Janice left me. She left some of her stuff behind. I'm just building a box." And Michael says, "Why would you do that? Why don't you just go to the liquor store, get some cardboard boxes, put her stuff in there?" John says, "Well, I don't want them to get messed up." And anyway, chases them out. Michael goes back inside. About hour or two later, Michael makes his way back outside again. Now he sees the garage doors are closed. He is curious, and he goes over, and the garage doors had little glass panes. So he pressed his face up against the glass, and what he observed is this plywood box is now constructed. It's about 4 foot by, 20 inches by 18 inches. And he sees his brother John picking up some clothing on the floor that was Janice's, and he's rolling these items up and putting them in the box. And he's crying as he's doing so. Well, to fast forward the story, Jim, Michael sees the box in that garage a few days later. It's nailed shut. It sits in that garage from November of 1974 until May of 1979. For 5 years, it stayed in that garage. 5 years later, John has moved away. He's working and living in Hammond, Indiana. One day, the grandfather's going out the garage. They find the box, and inside the box is Janice's dismembered remains. She's in that box. Her body was intact, except for her legs were removed just below the knee. Michael told Grandpa, "Hey, we got to call the sheriff's office." Grandpa says, "We're not calling anybody. We're calling John." And John came, retrieved the box, and took off with it. So that's the story Michael tells us. And there's a lot more detail you'll read about in the book. But so now I'm having a hard time understanding this magical story about this box where a body doesn't decompose or smell or leak. But I had to figure out if this was true or not. And ultimately, when John had picked up the box, he drove 8 hours in his 1979 Corvette with this box next to him in the passenger seat, drove it back to Indiana, stopped on a rural road, and then he dropped it on the side of the road down. It was a ravine. So from the road, you couldn't see it, but because it was a steep ravine. But the following spring, the county road crew in Indiana, Newton County, is repairing potholes. Bunch of men on foot fixing these potholes, and they look, and there's this plywood box. They're curious. They open up, and they find Janice. So once we made that connection, she was buried as a Jane Doe. We went and exhumed her body, conducted DNA analysis, confirmed it was her, and that's how the case against John Smith was made.
So bringing John back into it, I mean, he keeps hip hopping, and again, the book, again, ladies, you read it because it's so great. Your relationship is so genuine. It's a genuine relationship. But you then tie in and tell the story of the body is now, it's in a pauper's grave or a pauper's cemetery, a stone without any writing on it. So how Fran or not Fran, but Janice sort of indicates there's this information of thank you or my birthday or tell that. Again, it's a story with John, which is also heartwarming. You want to believe this is true.
Yeah. So along the way, to your question, and remember, this investigation spanned so many years. Because now I had this resource of John Edward, and I could not deny the value of the information he's providing. It proved to be true. John was in California. Michael, everything was panning out. At some point, just anecdotally, John says to me, "Janice is saying thank you for the birthday present." And I have no idea what he's talking about. Thank you for the birthday present. It made no sense to me. She's dead. Why am I getting her birthday present? And then there were some other comments. But to your point, just by coincidence, not by intention, the day that the FBI went out and exhumed her body from the grave happened to be her birthday, which I believe was March 1st. So it was just this very strange, and that was not by design. It was just by circumstance. So that was just yet another piece. John is a remarkable guy.
And am I correct, just to sort of tag the story, that John sees or feels that she was at the grave, her own grave, pointing?
Yeah, at some point he made a comment, which is in the book, about a tombstone with no writing on it or something of that nature. It was like that. And it turned out that when she was buried, initially she had a marker that said Jane Doe on it. And the high school kids would constantly steal the marker. So there wasn't even a marker anymore. So part of the challenge in finding where she was buried was there wasn't even a stone there anymore. So that took a little bit of effort to try to pinpoint where she was. But we did find her. We did exhume her, confirm who she was, and that's how the case came together.
Now, we'll talk a little bit about them and it solves in the charges that eventually come to John Smith. But the talking about Fran, it's another connection of not paranormal, but psychic energies, if you will. You are being directed partially by your own investigations and partially by John to a place where everyone, well, at least at one point, thinks she might be buried, where right. Fran might be buried. And if you could take us through that, you have to tell us a little bit about the opium perfume, but that, again, I wrote down the 4 things: the feather, the perfume, the photo, which we want to talk about the face yeah. in your camera, and fingers in my hair.
Yeah. So what you're making reference to is, the investigation at the time that John killed Fran. He was working at an industrial factory. It was called Carborundum at the time. It was a massive complex, 40 square acres, huge. This was like a facility that generations of families had worked, and they produced, it's called refractory block, concrete products that could withstand high heat. He was working as a project manager there as an engineer. And when we looked at timelines are always critical to an investigation, as you well know. This would have been the ideal place. He had run the place 24 hours a day, and I can't tell you how many searches over the years I've done everywhere, but to include Carver. But this one time that you're referring to, this is after Smith is convicted, after September 11th happened, after I had a moment. I had asked John Edward to accompany me. I didn't tell him where we were going. I just gave him the address, which is in Woodbridge, a place called Keysby, New Jersey. So John arrived one day with a colleague of his by the name of Jonathan Lewis, who also does what John does. I told him nothing. I put John in the car and I said, hey, we're going to drive around this place. If you feel anything, let me know. That's the premise. So John is in the front seat and we're driving and we're by this building and he says, wait a minute, stop. He says, what's at the end of this building to the right? There's something there, something very important. Well, there was this massive water tower, which is still there today. I just saw it this past weekend. I was up in Jersey. So we drive, and at the base of this water tower, there's a pump house. Now, back then, Jim, I knew nothing about water towers or how they work, but as you conduct a case, all of a sudden you become well informed because you have to understand how these things work. Well, a pump has pumps and engines that pump the water up, and gravity creates the pressure, the water pressure from the tower. Well, John sees this pump house and he's very animated. She's in there. He's insistent that she's in there. So I pull up, we get out, and to describe this pump house, I would say it was probably, 18, 20 feet one way, and it was probably 25, 30 feet. There was cinder block, white walls. The floor of it, half of it was concrete. The other half had these big, thick steel, heavy metal grates. And when you look through the grates, you could see these massive industrial pipes that fed the tower next door. So the three of us are in there, and John is saying, she's here. Well, it's not an especially big place, so we're going through it. She's not in there. We lift up these metal grates, and I jump down. It's probably, I'd say, an 8-10 foot drop, and we're crawling around. And look, I don't know much about the psychic world, but the point you raise is we're down in this filthy, black oil slicks, disgusting, horrible place. It smells bad. It's greasy. It's griming. It's disgusting. There was this pure white feather that was probably 12 inches long. Now, that meant nothing to me. That meant absolutely nothing to me. But when John and his colleague sees it, they start freaking out about this feather, and he explains to me that's some kind of symbol that he uses. Now he's even more insistent that at some point she was at this pump house or something of that nature. I don't understand it, but suffice to say, she's not there. Now we don't find anything that day, but I'm not going to let this go. So I'm constantly going back trying to figure this out. At one point, and I think you raised a question about a photograph, there was this big diesel engine that was used to power the pumps, and it wasn't working anymore. The thing wasn't working, and it stood on this concrete pad. And when you looked at the pad looked off. It looked like it had been altered. It looked like something had happened to this pad. And when you looked at it, it looked like a giant coffin. So at some point, I take a couple of agents out there, and we decide we're going to tear this thing up to see, hey, is there just anything in there? Well, anytime you're going to do a search in law enforcement, before you execute a search, you do it's called entry photos and exit photos. So you can show the judge, hey, this is what it looked like before we searched, and this will look afterwards. So I'm taking these routine pictures before, and we spent hours in there, and then when I'm done, I take the exit photos. Well, that night, I drive back. I was living in upstate. I was in upstate New York, Guilderland. I never forget. I went to my house this late, and John knew I was out there that day, and he called me as I'm getting in the house and said, "How'd you make out?" I said, "John, look, man, she's not there." And he says, "I'm telling you, there's some connection to this water tower." I'm like, "Okay, I believe you, but I'm telling you, she's not there." And he says, "Did you take pictures?" I said, "Did I take pictures?" He said, "Yeah." And he says, "Is it film or digital camera?" So it was a digital camera. And he gave me a number, whatever the number was. Let's say it was 17. I can't remember what the number was. He says, "She's telling me she's in one of the pictures." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he refers me to this particular picture. And I'm in my kitchen, it's late at night, and I'm going through these pictures. And I want you to imagine like you're walking into a room and you're going from left to right. Well, it's clear, clear, clear. And then there's this one picture where clear as day, there's something in the picture. Now, I can't tell you what it is, but when you look at it, there's clearly an image there. There's clearly something in this photograph. Now, I can't tell you that it's her. All I can tell you is very evident that something's in this picture. The pictures after it are clear. The last part of the story that you referenced, another time I'm out searching this whole property, this 40 square acres. I have another agent with me. And it's around this time of the year, actually. It's actually after Thanksgiving. It gets dark early. And I can't tell you how many days or weeks of my life I was out here looking for her. But we're walking around the property, and all of a sudden, this incredibly powerful, overwhelming smell of perfume hits us. Now, it was so powerful. If you've ever smelled like an old woman who wears too much perfume, like it takes your breath away kind of thing, it was of that level. And I don't say anything at first. And the agent with me says, "Bob, do you smell anything?" And it was a female. I said, "I don't know. What do you smell?" She says, "I think I smell perfume." I said, "Yeah, I do too." She says, I asked her, are you wearing perfume? She said, "I don't wear perfume." And it stayed with us for a while, then it dissipated. But that same night, and you referenced it, it was a Monday night. I know that because I was watching Monday Night Football. I was staying in a hotel in Jersey. My family was in upstate New York. And I had just taken a hot shower. I got off the phone and said goodnight to my wife and children. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell the story because it sounds so goofy, but everything I'm telling you happened. The book wasn't written to convince everybody. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, but I'm in the hotel room sitting up in bed. I'm watching the football game. The Broncos were playing that night. And you know that moment when you're kind of drifting off, you're not quite as sleepy, and that in-between moment. Well, all of a sudden, I assure you, as God is my witness on my life, it felt like fingers going through my hair, and it was undeniable. And it startled me so much. I sat up in bed, almost like gasping my breath. My heart was racing. And the minute I sat up, the entire inside of this hotel room was filled with perfume. It was the same perfume that I smelled at that place. I thought I was cracking up. I went out into the hallway. The perfume was not there. I go back in my room. It was there. Needless to say, I did not get much sleep that night. But the final nail in the coffin was when I was driving back to upstate New York. The following day, I called Fran's daughter, Dee Dee, and I said, "I have a crazy question. By any chance, did your mom wear perfume?" She said, "Oh my God, did my mom wear perfume?" She was a closet smoker, so she used mints and gum to disguise the smell of the cigarettes. And I said, "Well, I don't know much about perfume. Did she wear different perfume?" She said, "No, she only wore one." I said, "What was it?" She said, "It was opium." Well, again, I don't know anything about opium. So before I got home, there was a shopping mall outside of Albany. I pulled in there to a Macy's department store I remember the Christmas lights. There's a pretty young girl behind the counter at the perfume desk, and I asked her if they had this perfume. And she was about to reach for the bottle, and I said, "Hold on, are there other perfumes that are similar to this?" And she said, "Yeah." So I said, "Can we do a little experiment here? Can you pick like 3 or 4 of them and mix them up? And I want to smell them one at a time." And she probably thought I was just screwing around with her, but she had these little paper strips, and she would spray it. And she handed one to me. It was very, very strong, and that wasn't it. And the next one wasn't it. And then all of a sudden, she handed me this. I'm getting the hair on my arm is standing up right now as I'm telling this story. As soon as I smelled that other strip, it scared the living crap out of me. It was the same perfume that I smelled in the hotel and out at the plant that night. There was no doubt about that.
Ultimately, did you have to testify at all in the Smith trial, or was there enough? You did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it was about a week trial or something like that. It was about a week, I think.
And ultimately, he's convicted of the murder of Janice. Right. And gets, I believe it was 15 to life, 10 to life or 15 to life. And you, again, were continuing to look for, if you could find again, for closure and everything else, Fran's body.
I don't know that. I hope by circumstance Fran's family watches this. They will never know the lengths I went to try to find their mom and their sister. It cost me a lot personally, professionally. I went above and beyond. I'm sorry that I never found her, but it wasn't from a lack of effort. I spent most of my career trying to find their mom, and they'll never know what I did, but I did it out of care for them and for Fran.
Well, and again, I know, I'm not blowing smoke, that, again, it's very clear in the book that most of your superiors, as time went on, I said, well, leave this alone. This is not what we're paying you for. Leave it. So it's not just fighting, the crooks out there in the dead ends. Even with the help of John Edward, there was dead ends. But you're also, looking over your shoulder and, am I going to get a reprimand? What's going to happen to me on this?
I guess one of those.
The kicker, of course, in the book, it's very clear why it was done. John Smith, eventually, I forget how it's put, especially he has a prosecution agreement. So he's not admitting that he killed Fran, but this way, if everyone stops looking for the body, then there's no murder. So he's just going to, it's very not complicated, but intricate. And I know this is why there's lawyers. They came up with this, which I've never heard before. It would ultimately stop the investigation and close that case in essence, so that it couldn't come back to bite him. So technically, I guess he could get out on parole on just the murder of Janice. Am I recounting that correctly?
Yeah, and so there was a deal struck. I was not aware of the details of it until after it was done, and it felt like I got cut open, and it was horrible. But ultimately, he did not confess to killing her, but he admitted that he took her body and he put her body in a dumpster at Carborundum, which I know John Smith. The dumpster he's referring to is a 40 cubic yard dumpster that was used by hundreds of employees. There's no way in God's earth that he's taking his wife's body and throwing her in a dumpster. That's not John Smith, and that did not happen. But that's the deal he struck, and the only way that can be undone is if one day Fran is found. If she's found one day, then we can still bring charges to him, because that would represent that he lied to the prosecutor's office.
Now, as I pointed out as we started to my audience, and now I'm going to make good on my promise that there are many, many cases. This is a big one, and why I like to cover it, or why I wanted to cover it, is because it shows the birth of your relationship with John Edward, and also very much explains a lot of your investigation and your questioning, and obviously many, many cases. But the other one that you cover, because it does have to do with John, is Michael Vick. That was one I thought, is that okay to talk about? Because first of all, everyone knows who Michael Vick is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because more in that case is your interrogation technique. And it was marvelous. Again, it's all recounted page by page. It's almost like a transcript. And so tell us again, now you were involved because you weren't doing an investigation, you were doing a lie detector. Is that correct? That was another thing, one of your side gigs at the FBI is you were in a unit that did lie detectors. Yes.
Yeah, so for many years, I served as a polygraph examiner for the FBI, and as my career progressed, I became a supervisor and then the chief of the FBI's polygraph program. So at some point, we were contacted by the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and the United States Attorney's Office in Richmond, Virginia, about this investigation with Michael Vick. It was led by the Virginia State Police and the USDA. We, the FBI, don't investigate dogfighting, but I was contacted because they were when I say they, the prosecution and the investigators, at a point where Vic had two co-conspirators involved in this dogfighting operation, and both had, as a result of the investigation and their arrest and their charges, they agreed to cooperate, and they both gave detailed accounts of how this criminal enterprise operated with these dogs and what happened with these dogs in tremendous detail. And their testimony was that Michael Vick himself was intimately involved in the operation to include, and I don't want to get too graphic, but what happened to these dogs. The challenge that they had was Michael Vick had a good attorney named Billy Martin, and Vick represented to the prosecution and to ultimately the judge by the name of Henry Hill. He basically said, hey, listen, I take ownership of this. These two guys were friends of mine. They worked for me. Yes, it was at my house and my property. I knew what was going on. However, I never killed or tortured any of these dogs. It wasn't me. His colleagues can say, oh, the heck, he didn't. Now, there was a quandary because you can imagine these two conspirators, they were no choir boys. They had rather lengthy criminal histories themselves. So the prosecution had to weigh, hey, do we go to trial and put these two guys up who probably have credibility issues against this beloved celebrity superstar or not? So they wanted us, the FBI, to conduct a polygraph interrogation of Michael Vick. I was not inclined to get involved with this matter. This was not an FBI matter, and not that I was trying to kick the can, but there was a lot of press at the time on this. PETA, a lot of animal activists. This was all over the news back then. This was a big deal, and not that I didn't want to help, but this was a leaky bag for me. But ultimately, my superiors were contacted by some high-level people, and it was decided we were going to do this. And ultimately, it was decided that I was going to be the one to do this interrogation of a polygraph of Michael Vick. So there was a lot riding on that because it was made clear to me that if he didn't confess, they were not going to bring charges against him. So it was literally, I hate to use a football analogy, it was 4th and goal. We were going to score, we weren't. So that was the analogy of it. Vic came in and back to the John Edward piece. You know, it was interesting. With regard to John, he said some things to me that just were silly and didn't make sense to me at the time. One of the things he said to me, well, you're going to get, when you get into confess, there'll be 3 people in the room. So when he used the word when, that's a presumptive word. So he's going to confess. But we don't have 3 people in the room. There's only, the way we work, there's only the interrogator and the subject. Rarely is there more than that. So that part didn't make sense. But the other thing he said, which was very strange, he says, you need to talk to him about football. I said, football? What does that have to, I mean, yeah, he's a football player, but what is the relevance? He says, no, he's not going to understand. You have to create a situation using a football analogy to help him understand the gravity of a situation. So to fast forward the story, Jim, Mike comes in, and I hope your viewers don't get angry with me. He was a very nice guy. I felt bad for him. I understand the allegations were horrific, but he was a nice guy. He was scared for a circumstance like most people are. And what you try to do is you try to give people the opportunity to set the record straight. Say, listen, I don't care what has transpired before I met you. If things aren't as they happen, now is your time. Before we move forward, let's set it right. And we don't even have to take this polygraph. But he held to his guns, right? And he said, no, I didn't do any of these things. Unfortunately, he conducted the polygraph. There were a bunch of issues, and he did not pass the test. And now my job became interrogating him and trying to get him to talk. I was very close with him, and he was very upset. And one of the parts he got upset was, he said, you know, Mike, here's what's going to happen. This thing's going to go to trial. You know, there's going to be 12 jurors and probably 2 or 3 alternates on this case. And I'm going to guess that probably half of those jurors are probably dog lovers. They probably have dogs. And one at a time, your buddies are going to get up there and say, this is what happened. This is what happened. Michael was a part of it. The next guy's getting up, and then you're going to say, I don't know nothing about nothing. You're going to have a problem here. And with that, he got upset and asked to speak to his attorney. So, of course, I ended the conversation, brought his attorney, and his attorney was in there for, 20 minutes or so, and then I went in the room. And it's ironic because remember John said there were 3 people in the room. So now I'm in the room with the attorney and Michael, and the attorney was good, very professional. And I had to get through Michael in a way he could understand. So the analogy basically went something to the effect of, hey, Michael, let me ask you something. Why is it you're famous? Why does everybody know you? He says, well, I'm a football player. I said, no, that's not just the reason. So, well, I'm a quarterback. I said, no, Mike, there's a lot of quarterbacks. There's 32 football teams. And finally, he got to the point where, well, I'm fast. And I said, well, of course, Mike, it's exciting to watch you play football. You've got this incredible athleticism. You know, when the pocket around you is collapsing, miraculously, you're so fast you can scramble out of it and run for the first down or the touchdown or find an open receiver. I said, Michael, that's happening right now. Your whole world is collapsing. The pocket is collapsing. You can lie to the judge. You can lie to the investigators. You can lie to me. The only man you can't lie to is this man sitting right next to your attorney. He's your open receiver. You can't lie to him. And the difference here, you're not going to lose the game or take the sack. This is your life. And with that, he turned to his attorney and said, I did these things. And that's how the confession came. So that's the Michael Vick story in a nutshell.
It's a wonderful story. Now, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but because it shows sports, if you could give us the comment from John Edward, it gets sort of like a bumper to this on the Whitey Bulger case. So he helped you with Whitey Bulger, and I'm from this area, so I know Whitey Bulger. So after that, he didn't know. I mean, you give him a name or a case, and again, he doesn't necessarily know the details. So when it was over, what was his question about Whitey Bulger?
So I think what you're getting at is with the Whitey Bulger case, and I don't need to go in detail. John helped myself and two other agents on that case. And when John was doing his thing, he kept getting the name James. Well, James is James Bulger. He wasn't saying Whitey, he was saying James, and he was describing this John Gotti kind of character and not knowing anything about it. And he gives us great details about the case. But I think what you're asking of me, John has no sports acumen. He doesn't know sports, let alone players. And when it was done, my two colleagues walked out of the room, and John Edwards says to me, did I do well? How did it go? I said, you did great. And I said, John, do you know who this is that we're talking about in this case? And he says, no. I said, this is Whitey Bulger. And John's response was, Whitey Bulger? Is that a baseball player? I said, no, Whitey Bulger's not a baseball player.
My God, that's too much. So as we wrap up here, a wonderful hour, I do want to fill in my audience. First of all, if they want to get in contact with you, again, here's the book, ladies and gentlemen. And I will put it everywhere in print that thumbnails about my podcast. But this is a book you have to get, and because it is, I'll be picking it up several times more. Just there's several sections that are just so much fun to read. Well, what are you doing now?
I still work for the government in a contract capacity. I suffice to say, I provide training to the next generation of investigators. I work for another government agency, and I train them how to do their job based upon my years of doing what I did. So I'm teaching now. I provide training to other people. And
are you going to write some more, I hope?
We'll see. I think you may see this book on TV in the next year or so.
Oh, I'm not surprised. Oh, excuse me. So this is what scares me about when I get these books. The first thing I do, I contact them, and it's weird. Sometimes it'll be a couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm on board. We're good. Things happen, and now it's going to be a couple of weeks. Can we set up? Oh, well, I've got some movie interest. I can't talk to you.
Yeah, no. So stay tuned. I think you may see this somewhere.
Great. I'm so excited. Well, this has just been, Bob, this has just been a wonderful hour.
Sure.
And in the meantime, have a good night.
Sure.
I know my wife's making dinner, so I'm getting dinner.
Right.
I don't have to do it tonight.